Ladies and gentlemen, today is July 22nd, 2024, and we are here to talk about the world. Current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Hello?
Yo. Hello, sir. Thank you for coming on, even though you have a bit of a cough.
Yeah, apparently I tested positive for COVID.
Well, at least you won in your test.
What it is. Yeah, there's that. Well, how's your week been?
It's been good. It's been a lot more busy and active. I had friends come into town here in LA that we got to go to Universal Studios with, and then we went to a restaurant yesterday and walked around town some. So yeah, we had a good time. That's why I couldn't do World Discussion yesterday, but it sounds like it was probably nice to get a rest day for you.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I'm feeling better today.
Good. Chat wanted to say that they hope you heal quickly.
Me too. Me too.
Very good. Well, quick gaming news before we get into world stuff. My solo honor mode run wiped on Merkel, the bone god guy. So, yeah, I'm going to go at that guy with a whole battle plan next time. He's beatable, but you have to have burst damage on the boss, and it needs to overcome his resistances in some way, because he's resistant to slashing, bludgeoning, piercing, immune to poison, resistant to necrotic. So got to be kind of specific about the damage output. I ended up running out of spell slots, and the physical damage dealers, when they were all hurt, weren't really strong enough to be able to take him out.
Tough boss.
It's okay.
It should be fun when we get to it.
Yeah. One of the key differences from how I'm going to hit it in my solo run this time and next time, and also just for us, is get haste on every person in the party, either with a potion of speed or a haste potion. I ended up, I think I wiped with like 6 potions of speed in my inventory, and it's better to spend those a little bit too early and maybe burn it for an extra turn or two after the boss is dead than it is to wait too long and have 2 people downed and your party's very scuffed and about to die, and then try to rip them after that, because you don't really have spell slots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my condolences.
Thank you. I was sad for a bit, and I'm still sad, but the plus side is Jaheira was dead in that run, and Minthara was dead in that run, and Lae'zel was dead in that run. So a lot of characters died for some reason or another that I can mostly avoid next time. Jaheira got folded in half by Ketheric Thorm in the phase 1. She, if you persuade her, actually you might not even need a roll for it. If you insist that she joins you to go fight him, and you tell her, hey, the Harpers are fine, they can take care of themselves, she'll go with you as a non-party member, kind of like a pet or a summon.
Yeah.
But in that criteria, you can't res her.
Right.
Yeah. So he one-turned her. I was like, she's going to cast a lightning and break these little skeleton eggs. He just walked over and smote her one time for 65 damage, and she died. It's like, well, that's her storyline.
Yeah. C'est la vie. What about your Act 3 honor mode run with your friends?
That one's still on. We beat the big dragon, like the lightning dragon, and we have 2 of the nether stones. We just have to fight the stabbing blood lady next. And we have not fought Raphael or anything yet, so a lot to do in that one still.
Yeah, you're getting there though. You're getting there, sounds like.
Yeah, there was a really huge, obvious news item yesterday. I don't know if you want to start with that or get to that after some stuff.
I'm ambivalent. Whatever you want to do is fine.
Okay. So, for those who've not been on the internet in a few days, Biden dropped out as the Democratic candidate. And this basically raises some questions. Maybe you have better answers than me, but the endorsement of the Democratic Party is something that's a very powerful force. They tend to be very clear about who their person is, rather than have it be a split decision and they try to let the people figure it out. They more so tell people who to vote for. So Biden has formally endorsed Kamala Harris for president, and it seems like she's set and ready to run, which fits with what I've read was a recent trend in that the vice president ends up running for president after the president's done. Al Gore did the same thing with Clinton, and then we have this Biden running after Obama, and then Hillary. Wait, did that follow the trend or not? I don't think she was VP.
No, Biden was.
Yeah, Biden was. So then now Kamala will be the third time that the Democratic Party has done that.
George H.W. Bush did it after Reagan. Kinda, sorta LBJ. not entirely voluntary in that case.
Was that because Kennedy was shot at the time? Gotcha.
Yeah. And I think he did run. Yeah, he ran in 64 after that. So put an asterisk by him. Nixon got impeached, but I think, was Ford the nominee in 77? I think he was, wasn't he?
I don't know.
Yeah, Ford was VP in Nixon's second term. Nixon got impeached. Then Ford became president. And I think he got the nomination in 77 and then lost against Carter. Nobody liked Ford. Everybody was mad at him because he pardoned Nixon. That was the big thing that got him into trouble. If not for that, maybe he would have been okay. He wasn't like the worst guy. But pardoning Nixon really aggravated a lot of people. So that was kind of the thing that sealed his fate. Yeah. I mean, it's vice presidents running for president after. Yeah, that is relatively more recent. I'd say maybe mid-20th century on. I think a lot of vice presidential picks were generally elder statesmen kind of guys, and they kind of aged out, basically, over the course of serving as VP, so they generally weren't all that interested, historically speaking. But that started to change mid-20th century or so. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on a big tangent there.
It's okay. We do tangents sometimes. Chat's going to be used to them by this point.
So yeah, Biden did withdraw. It surprised the shit out of me. He was sending a lot of strong signals that he was going to stick it out come hell or high water. And he's been a pretty savvy politician over the course of his life. He's especially good at sort of the backroom dealing aspect of the job. So I figured if anybody could stick it out, it would be him. But in the end, he ended up getting talked down. And I do think it was that he got talked down. I think if he'd really wanted to, he could have stayed. It would have been rough going.
Who would have done that? His advisors?
Who would have done what?
Talked him down.
Oh, it was a fucking team effort from what I was reading. I wasn't able to follow it as closely as I would have liked because I was in Seattle getting sick and sleeping on an air mattress. But from what I was reading on my phone in the middle of the night in my house without air conditioning, I keep forgetting you guys don't have that up there.
Yep.
From what I was reading, there was a lot of growing institutional pressure from basically elder party members. So Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama. Those were the big names that I remember. And there were some people within the administration that were kind of signaling as well, but the real pressure came from those guys because they were more his peers rather than people just working for him. And there were apparently a number of private conversations over the past week that eventually culminated in the decision. So I think those conversations were probably the most important factor. Data may have played a role. I was reading that some of his fundamentals were weakening in some of the more recent polling, keeping in mind that the most relevant polling is in the swing states, and specifically the swing counties within the swing states. So the polling in those particular areas was starting to drag, and it was already not great. So that may have been an additional factor there. So yeah, between institutional pressure, donor pressure, everybody knows that some donors were starting to withhold donations on account of skepticism that he could pull it off, combined with potentially polling. All seems to have come together. It may have been also that he got COVID. I can attest personally that I would not want to run for president while sick with COVID. I barely want to get out of my damn bed. So I don't begrudge him for wanting to quit. I know the feeling.
Well, he has a few years on you, too.
True. So it's even worse for him, most likely. Sorry to everybody listening to me cough. I'm sure it's not very exciting.
Isn't it the opposite? It's very exciting. You never know when it's going to happen.
That's true.
Drink plenty of water. So yeah, it's a momentum shift here where Biden, he probably had the edge at the start when people were wondering if Trump could beat him, and then the debate did not bode well, not to any credit of Trump having an outstanding performance, but just Biden having such a bad performance.
Yeah.
And with his age, it wasn't really as excusable as if you were just like really exhausted and underslept and kind of rambled, but then you got rested and then you're kind of back to normal. Like, he's been in the political sphere for a very long time, and he's the oldest person who's ever tried to run for president, so it makes sense that he would have a difficult time just managing the energy, because he's also president too.
Yeah.
Which means he has a lot of obligations beyond just the campaign stuff and schmoozing with people and trying to catch votes. He's also trying to help lead the country.
Well, keep in mind too that it's normal for people running for president to make mistakes during their campaign. Shit invariably goes wrong sooner or later. So what defines a campaign in that situation is not necessarily the mistake, but how you recover from it.
Yeah.
And in Biden's case, yes, the debate was bad, but he could have recovered from that. The issue is that he didn't. He could not stop the bleeding. Like, every time he came out and said that he was going to do like a rally or like a big trip abroad, like with the NATO meet, or a big interview, in all these cases, he said he would do these things and that they would, exemplify how the debate was not representative of his abilities as president. And then he just kind of screwed them up, all of them, in different ways to varying degrees. So he was never able to squelch that doubt, that seed of doubt that was planted by the debate. And so that also really hobbled him, I think. Again, I think all else equal, like, he would have kept going, but there was just so much pressure that, and the pressure came in compelling forms, right? It's not like it's not like random people whining on Reddit are the reason that he decided to withdraw, right? These are Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, etc., Barack Obama. These are all people he's known a long time, respects. The fact that they were coming into him and making what would have been compelling arguments for him to step aside. That's what really did it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're right that the debate did end up being much more important than I think anybody expected. Certainly more so than I expected. I fully expected that the debate would have an effect, but even after the debate, seeing how bad it went, I expected it to have an effect. But I figured that there would be a course correction, and then that other dramatic shit would happen that would end up making it a blip on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
But it did not pan out that way.
Yeah. So I guess the big question then, there are a few of them. Who else then for the Democrats? Is it hard set going to be Kamala Harris just because she has the momentum of being on Biden's team, or are there other options that would be considered and talked about?
So that's the million-dollar question right now. I mean, all of the endorsements coming in are coming in for Harris, and I think a lot of the party leadership is almost scared to pick somebody else other than Harris.
Mm-hmm.
She ticks a lot of good boxes, right? She's African-American / South Asian. I think she's like half and half.
Mm-hmm.
Although technically the African-American is Jamaican, but that's still African-American.
Mm-hmm.
So that's popular with one major component of the Democratic coalition. Mm-hmm. And from what I was reading, there were a lot of African-American leaders within the party that were saying that they would be upset if they didn't pick her, because they would see that as a kind of betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a relevant factor. Another relevant factor is the campaign money. Because Harris was basically a signatory to the paperwork for their campaign. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know like the legal specifics, but basically Biden and Harris are on the paperwork for their campaign money. And so it's pretty academic to just transfer the money over to her and have her run that campaign war chest. Uh-huh. It would not be impossible for that money to be shifted over to like a totally new person, but from what I was reading, legally speaking, it's going to be the easiest to just give it to Harris. Mm. So that's possibly a relevant factor as well. But that said, the convention possibly will be an open convention, meaning that there won't be like a fixed candidate who will be set to win. Mm-hmm. And in that case, you could see a challenger. They're running out of time. They've only got like 3 weeks. I think the convention is like August something. So, if there is a challenger, they're going to have to pop up pretty quick here, because otherwise Harris is just going to enter the convention with maximum momentum. Mm-hmm. And it'll be easier to deflect that the sooner you declare that you're going to challenge. So we'll see in that regard. I don't know if anybody will have the balls to do it at this point, but it's 2020s, so who the fuck knows? It's been a roller coaster since 2020, so, flip a coin as far as predicting outcomes. Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say Harris will get the nomination.
Who would be the main contenders to take it if she didn't get it?
Nobody's exactly sure. I've seen some people talk about the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whittinger, I forget her name. She's done pretty well in an important swing state, so she's gotten a lot of attention. I think the governor of Maryland, Bashir, I think his name is, has gotten some looks. I'm probably screwing up these locations. There's a number of people who have been dog-eared as being potential presidential candidates in 2028. And pretty much any of those guys has the potential to contest for the 2024 nomination. but I don't think there's any one of them that really stands out right now. And certainly none of them have been really going out of their way to throw their name in the ring. In the ring, rather. So that suggests to me that they're not necessarily interested for 2024. So unless there's like a surprise challenger, I would have to go Harris. I don't know. Maybe RFK does something crazy and tries to make a run for it, but I don't think that's likely for it.
What's his backstory? I've heard lots of people mention him, but
environmental lawyer. I think specifically anti-nuclear was his thing. Obviously, scion of the Kennedy dynasty. Brainworms, famously. Did you hear that story?
No. He had brainworms?
Oh, yeah, that was a thing on Reddit for a while. Yeah, he was feeling sick and went to the doctor, and they found a dead worm in his brain. Like a parasite or something. I don't remember the details. I'll defer to chat on that. But yeah, everybody was making jokes about him being crazy because of the brainworm.
What if he was kidnapped on an autoload?
Possible. Lots of Futurama jokes, too. Some good references there. Yeah, RFK is kind of running as the alternative candidate, the centrist guy. But, I don't know. Some of the stuff he thinks is a little kook. Anti-nuclear itself is not like a winner with me. That doesn't seem like something that
anti-nuclear weapons or nuclear energy?
Energy.
Oh. Because he thinks that it's going to like Chernobyl or some shit?
Pretty much. You know, the environmentalist movement really had a lot of its initial momentum, garnered a lot of its initial momentum back in the mid-20th century from opposing nuclear energy, because it was perceived by many to be unsafe, that the risk was just too high. And incidents like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl just exacerbated those fears, and in the minds of environmentalists justified their prejudice against nuclear energy. And, you know, since 1990, let's say, the environmentalist movement has shifted away from anti-nuclear. It's become much more focused on recycling, renewable energy, you know, stuff like that. But for the older members of the environmentalist movement, they never moved away from the anti-nuclear stance. That's always been a core component for them. You can really see that manifest in Germany. One of the big things that they've wanted to do, one of the big things that the government did was get rid of nuclear plants, famously, which, you know, obviously hurt them when the Ukraine wars started. But the reason they did that was largely because of environmentalist pressure. That was one of the conditions that the Greens demanded for their support in a coalition government with the SPD. And that was largely driven by older voters. I'm sure there's younger voters that wanted it too, but it's definitely a core thing that older voters had wanted for a very long time. And it's not that different in the United States. You know, there's a lot of older guys in a lot of older Greens, shall we say, that are much less focused on renewables, walkable cities. You know, urban planning is kind of the new sexy thing with the Greens. But the older guys are still very much dialed into, you know, things like nuclear, things like local restrictions. You know, people now talk more about having fewer zoning laws and zoning restrictions to make it easier to build up for more housing and to create more dense cities. But older environmentalists see local restrictions as a way to restrict the ability of industrialists to build polluting plants and other things in their area. So for them, you know, the ability to control local construction is a core tool to try to prevent the pollution of the local environment. So there's actually some tension between older and local Greens specifically over that, issue, the issue of local zoning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going with that.
You're good. I was just asking about the anti-nuclear stance and where it was coming from, because
Oh, right.
RFK is where we started, because he's anti-nuclear.
Right. So RFK is reflective of that. He's of that generation of environmental activists, and so you can see that both in his career and some of his rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. Chat's asking why nuclear is considered bad. It's situationally bad. This is just my understanding, where it has the capacity to be very problematic and you can have a reactor meltdown, but that requires you to do things very incorrectly to get to that point, or just to be negligent of how harvesting that energy works. If you do everything correctly, it's one of the most cost-effective and clean ways to generate energy. You do generate some waste, but it's not a huge amount compared to, say, the waste you get from oil and coal and other things like that. So it's relatively low waste. It's just the potential for something very bad to happen if you don't follow protocol and if you do stuff wrong.
Yeah.
So done well, nuclear is pretty safe. Done poorly, nuclear go boom.
Yeah. I would add two things to that. One, what would you call it? The waste that nuclear plants do produce in the form of like the used rods and whatnot, that lasts a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be difficult to store properly in a way that doesn't, bleed out and pollute the surrounding environment. So proper storage of nuclear waste is expensive, difficult. And in the minds of environmentalists, the easiest way to deal with it is to not produce it at all, which means no nuclear energy. So that's one of the factors as well. Also, keep in mind that in the mid 20th century, when the environmentalist movement really got started, people did not know nearly as much about radiation and nuclear energy, and there was a lot of skepticism and mistrust about what the government had released, what information the government had released about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fed into a growing mistrust over time, especially in the era of the counterculture in the 1960s. The collapse of trust in government in that period accelerated mistrust in nuclear energy, in so much as trust in it depended on trust in government data and information. Mm-hmm. And 3 Mile Island in the 1970s just made it even worse, because that seemed to justify that mistrust. Even though it was way overblown as an incident, nobody died. I don't think anybody got cancer. The levels of radiation that resulted from 3 Mile Island were relatively negligible.
What's the quick breakdown of 3 Mile Island? When and where was that?
Where was it? I want to say it was in New York. Or maybe Pennsylvania. I don't remember. It was northeastern U.S. somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it was an island on a river. They built a nuclear plant on it. And I'm probably not going to remember the details, but basically there was an incident where they had to vent radiation. There was a mechanical failure or something at the plant. And mm-hmm. So radiation levels had to spike. And I think the surrounding neighborhood, there was a suburb nearby, was evacuated mm-hmm. temporarily. And I think it was done largely as a precaution, but everybody flipped the fuck out. Because there was already so much paranoia on the left and among Greens about nuclear energy. So when there finally was an incident like that, everybody
we were right.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a kind of meltdown, so to speak, on the left over that. And the result was just further demand for curtailments and regulations of nuclear energy. They did not ban nuclear energy, but they did successfully regulate it into the ground. There are so many precautionary regulations surrounding nuclear energy in the U.S. that resulted from 3 Mile Island that it got to be very difficult to build new plants, and that's a big part of the reason nuclear energy has not seen nearly as much investment as other forms of energy over the past 40-some years.
Mm-hmm. I think globally speaking, it's pretty big in France.
Yeah. and a big chunk of their energy comes from nuclear. Although I found it interesting, they apparently were not maintaining it correctly, much to my surprise. I had assumed after a nuclear, sorry, not nuclear yet, after the Ukraine war started, that France would be fine because they didn't get a lot of their energy. That is to say, their electricity from natural gas. And somebody in chat, while I was talking about it a couple years ago, mentioned that actually would be a problem because a whole bunch of their nuclear reactors were up for maintenance and would have to be shut down. And that largely stemmed from the fact that they had just put off maintenance for so long that it was now unavoidable. And unfortunately for them, it became unavoidable at like the worst possible time. Yeah, that's another problem with nuclear power. And this is a genuine criticism from what I've read. As you mentioned, like if you do it right, it's not a problem. But the trouble is that a lot of countries that do nuclear power kind of skimp on the maintenance after a while. Mm-hmm. And if you do that for long enough, the risk builds up. And that can be a problem.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to fall under incompetence. It could be economically cutting corners where they're like, it's probably fine. And you can't really do that with nuclear stuff.
Well, you can. France did. The trouble is that people are not always happy to accept the trade-off in risk there. Mm-hmm. And governments are not always honest about that, in so much as they're the ones running the power plants. So you have to take it seriously, or if you don't want to take it seriously, at least be open with the public about it so that they can make a judgment of their own and vote in politicians that reflect preferences in that regard. Mm-hmm. But again, the whole green movement started out predicated largely on mistrust in government, so not a lot of trust there in governments being honest about it. And again, the easiest way to deal with a lack of trust in government's ability to run nuclear power plants is to just prevent them from being built in the first place. That, to a lot of the older green crowd, is the best and optimal solution there. Mm-hmm. It's a long deviation from RFK.
It's okay. We were trying to figure out what he's about, because I haven't really watched him talk too much, so I don't really know. But he seemed kind of like an alternative, like you were saying, to the main party-backed candidates, which I think a lot of people like that as well. That gives him the outsider cred that Trump fancied himself having when he ran the first time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's trying to bank on that, but I don't think it's going to work. Trump still has that market pretty well cornered. Mm-hmm. I think at most he could be a spoiler. So we'll see what he does and what impact he has. I think the last data I saw was that his effect would be to siphon the votes of Democrats and the Democratic and Republican candidate relatively equally. Mm. So he may not be able to swing the outcome of the presidential election if that does end up being the case. Mm-hmm. But who's to say? Things could change between now and November. Anybody's guess. Wild, unpredictable times make it difficult to forecast. Mm-hmm. Shrugging your shoulders and saying, fuck if I know, is not like a sexy answer, but in the 2020s, that's easily the most honest answer. Mm-hmm. I'll throw out the usual disclaimer real quick. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please do correct me. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation from chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't read chat while I do this, but I will read it later while I'm convalescing. And I do enjoy the feedback. Always fun to learn from you guys.
We had a pretty funny comment this last week. Someone was saying that they were unable to continue to watch my channel because of this strong liberal bias.
Oh, the YouTube comment? Yeah, I saw that the other day. I guess I'm just too old. I still don't really think of globalism as being like a left-wing thing. Like when I was growing up, that was really very much a right-wing thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like I still
because being a
remember,
globalist allows you to maximize your capital and stuff, which is more
yeah,
traditionally a
it
conservative
was
thing.
corporations that were largely pushing for it back in like the 90s and the aughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up being like a bipartisan thing, but most of the resistance was from like the labor component of the Democratic coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Like I still remember the Battle of Seattle. Do you remember that back in '99?
No, what was that?
That was the WTO negotiations that were with regard to China joining the WTO, and there were just huge protests in Seattle that year,
Hmm.
specifically against China joining the WTO, as well as against the WTO in general. Uh, Not necessarily against all free trade, but more so just, for fair trade, as they put it. Yeah, those mass protests were also one of the catalysts for the sort of militarized form of policing that kind of spread around the US in the decades after.
Mm-hmm.
It's only in the past maybe 5 to 10 years that they've kind of started moving away from that again. But yeah, those protests were largely left wing in orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still kind of my framing for like globalism versus anti-globalism, but again, that's my age showing over the past, let's say 14 years, maybe less than that, like 2015, let's say, so like 9 years or so. There's been a political realignment in the United States, if not like the broader Western world in general, where traditional boundaries of left and right have started to blur and shift. And globalism probably is one of those issues. I don't think the boundaries are still entirely clear at this point, such that you can entirely say globalism is just a left wing thing. But I can see why people would think that, especially if they're more of the Trumpian populist bent,
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of has become associated more with the Republican Party and conservatism by extension. So then naturally, you assume then that the opposition must then be Democrat, socialist, left wing, etc. And there are definitely pro-globalist people in that coalition now, but a lot of them are disaffected Republicans,
Mm-hmm.
not entirely happy about being in the Democratic coalition, very much grudging, but they do see the Trumpian populism as more of a deviation from traditional conservatism than they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if that political realignment has legs. It may or may not last into the long term, but I think it's going to have permanent effects on sort of where the center of American politics is.
Mm-hmm.
It's already had pretty big effects in that regard, as we've talked about before.
I feel like for some people, you're talking about a specific demographic of people who understand the difference between Trumpian republicanism and like more traditional U.S. conservatism. I think a lot of people are more so red team or blue team is how they think about it, rather than necessarily the policies themselves.
Yeah, I could see that. Especially for people who are kind of new to politics, it's easy to kind of get wrapped up in it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was younger, I was the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And even older folks do that. My grandfather was a hardcore partisan
Mm-hmm.
most of his life, pretty much all of it. So yeah, there's people like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the partisan game, it's sexy. It makes you think that it's like Rebel Alliance versus the Empire, but it's not really.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly just a con. But trying to convince people of that is to run against the grain, right? Multi-billion-dollar media companies and consultants and PR agencies. Going against all of them is tough going.
Yeah.
It's like trying to stop a river with your hands. It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So I,
To me, it seems like trying to convince people in a language that they don't speak. If you're talking about specific policies and the shifting of norms over decades and the ways that different parties have waffled on issues over time, most people aren't thinking in those complexities. They're kind of echoing their pundits on TV, and their memory for that is pretty short term. They're kind of just talking about the current drama rather than thinking about the big picture. I actually ended up texting my dad today just to get his take on Biden dropping out and whatnot, and he and I have different opinions on a lot of political stuff, but it's cool to kind of exchange, like, what is your side talking about with this current issue versus mine. That can be very sobering and also just informative for seeing how other people are thinking about it and what they're browsing, because the same event can be served to you in very different formats with a completely opposite bias depending on where you're browsing the information. And as the regular reminder of this disclaimer, another one we have is every news source has a bias, including us. We can't be perfectly impartial, and no one is really ever able to be perfectly impartial, but you sometimes have the illusion of someone being totally fair and balanced whenever they're confirming all of your opinions, which makes you feel like you have things figured out and you're very smart. But that's serving confirmation bias, and then usually they'll give a very half-assed nod to the other side, which makes you feel like, okay, my news is balanced because they acknowledged the arguments on the other side, but then went right back to kind of confirming my bias again. So stay safe, try your best. Also be aware that some people do change their political alignment over the course of their life. Yeah. So keeping an attitude of openness and curiosity is much better than one of judgment and hatred, which oftentimes gets better traction on social media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, never forget, they want to keep you engaged. Kind of like a social media company, yeah. So it's the same deal with political parties and activists and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So, there's an immense amount of agitprop that is produced specifically for that reason. Mm-hmm. So, you have to keep that in mind. You got to keep that perspective, because otherwise they're just going to lead you around by the nose and have you just constantly pissed off at the world for no particular discernible gain on your part. Mm-hmm. Your life is not going to improve because you are mad about things in the world of politics. If you want to be passionate, by all means, advocate for your stuff, whatever it may be.
You should be able to distill that into an actionable personal plan, though, because I think a lot of people fall into cynicism and bitterness where they can articulate 100 different problems, but they make no forward effort on any of them, so it's just despair.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they inculcate. That's what they condition people to do, especially younger people. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that really got me out of partisan politics, is that I realized that I was just upset all the time, but I wasn't actually doing anything. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't really serving any purpose. So, what's the point then? Yeah, better to just learn more about the underlying issues. Because there's always going to be stuff going on that's going to upset you. Mm-hmm. But if you ignore that stuff and just focus on the underlying political calculus, focus on forecasting outcomes, focus on public policy analysis, all this really boring, dry stuff, it's actually very therapeutic in a sense, especially if you're coming from a partisan background. And keep in mind, too, that from the perspective of party elites, party analysts, that's actually how they view politics, right? They're not like hyper-partisan, angry people. They're not the kinds of people shaking their fist at their TV screen every night. The people who actually run things at the elite level, like, they're taking a technocratic approach to managing issues like that.
Yeah, they have to get through the yellow and red tape and do a lot of the boring paperwork stuff to make things happen, rather than, I think, a lot of the end form of media that people consume is the stuff that's made for people who are not politically literate. It's made to explain it to them in a way that they kind of end up with the answer rather than that they can reason through it themselves. It doesn't put the viewer on the spot and say, this just happened, what do you think about it? And they're trying to figure it out. Normally, if they're going to broadcast something on the news, they not only have the event, they also have how you should interpret the event with it, which gives them a lot more consistency in how their audience and their political people are going to be making moves.
Yeah, and keep in mind, too, that when you take that kind of technocratic approach, engaging in hyper-partisanship is a calculated move. From their perspective, you're just a number.
Yeah.
They need X number of votes, and according to the polling that we've done, the optimal way to get those votes is to do X, Y, and Z, and that could involve going on TV and complaining or framing something as being horrible in such and such way. It all feels and looks very passionate if you're not familiar with it, but it is a game. Like, it is just very estimated, calculated, planned out. And they do it over and over again. It's like clockwork for them. I was listening to some analysts, like specifically party analysts who work for, either the Republican or the Democratic Party, do interviews with NPR. Because, of course, they were getting feedback about what the parties thought about the impact of Biden withdrawing. And I was just kind of taken by how phony it sounded to me. Like, their responses were so cookie cutter and pre-baked. I could kind of tell. But when I was younger, I didn't necessarily feel that.
What's an example for this context?
They tend to home in more on talking points. They almost do it without thinking about it. It sounds like they do it without thinking about it, but they do it on purpose. They'll throw in, what would you call it? Framing is how I think about it. Loaded words, I guess, loaded language rather is another way. So, what was it? There was one Republican analyst who just kind of casually threw out stuff linking Kamala Harris to Biden, just kind of, and it was unprompted, which is why I noticed it. Like, they were asking about Biden withdrawing, and then he started kind of riffing on Kamala Harris and how she was kind of guilty by association. And that kind of language is purposeful. They're even at that stage when it had just happened, analysts on both the Democratic and Republican side were already trying to shape the conversation with loaded language. And again, strategic, right? That's a purposeful effort on their part. I'm struggling to remember what exactly was said. I don't think I can conjure it right now. But I
get you, though, but you're basically talking about using colored language that has a slant on its own that a viewer might not necessarily know that you are imposing the slant based on whether you talk about something as positive or negative, when before you did that, they might have had a neutral opinion on it. But by virtue of saying guilty by association, you're thinking about the guilt of Biden, which is an inherently negative concept. Whatever you believe about what he's been involved in, just by using that word, you're thinking about the person negatively. So it definitely can frame the conversation just by word choice.
Yeah. When you get asked a technical question, it can be difficult, but, the ideal is to try to answer it impartially. But political analysts are not paid to do that, so they very readily throw in subjectivity into their answers. And, if you're biased, if you share their beliefs, it's easy to hear that and think, oh, yeah, that's totally true. That confirms my bias. So good on them for telling the truth, speaking truth to power. But if you're more neutral and you're actually judging their statement for impartiality, you can see through that pretty quickly. PR is a skill, and they're very good at it. America probably has the best propaganda on the planet. We're very well practiced. Well, while we're talking about politics here, I think somebody else in an earlier YouTube comment had said that they thought I was biased because I was advocating globalism too much. It was a separate comment from the other guy you mentioned. And I would point out that in the statements he was referencing, I was not advocating for it. I was just saying that I thought it was inevitable. That's not the same as saying it's a good thing. Certainly, it's disruptive and comes with many downsides. But the reason I think it's inevitable is just because of 20th century history, because there was a collapse in what we would now call globalism, what at the time they would have called just free trade, as a result of the collapse in international relations and international security that occurred in the interwar years. If not also World War I. Obviously, there was a lot of trade disruptions in the First World War, but especially after the Great Depression, going into the 1930s, there was an immense amount of tit-for-tat trade war measures where trade between nations was slowly choked off. And the result was very negative. I don't think anybody looks at World War II as like a positive experience. And I grant that there were other contributing factors to World War II, but the collapse in free trade that happened in the decade leading up to the war was one of those major contributing factors. If you're Japan or Germany, countries that have large manufacturing bases, but that are weaker on natural resources, being cut off from free trade is a big problem for you, because you need natural resources from abroad, to feed your manufacturing, and you need to be able to export your manufacturing. And so inhibitions to international free trade hurt you economically and give you an incentive to build out as much of an empire as you can so that you can secure the markets you need to sell to and secure the natural resources you need to build the stuff that is to feed your manufacturing base, which is the mainstay of your economy. So disincentivizing global war is a positive thing. I don't think that should be all that controversial. So in so much as that's true, and in so much as the 1930s experience is an example of what happens when free trade collapses, it's to be avoided. Also, and this is more in line with the argument I made when we were talking last time, free trade is inevitable just because the economic advantages of free trade invariably benefit and make it inevitable that you're going to adopt it eventually. If you have 4 countries and two of them are isolationist and cut themselves off from free trade, and 2 of them don't. The 2 that don't are going to grow faster than the other 2, and eventually they're going to outcompete them in core strategic industries. And that's going to be a strategic problem for the other 2 countries, not just an economic problem. And the only way to deal with that problem is to embrace free trade so that you can achieve and benefit from the advantages of free trade that allowed the other 2 nations to get ahead of you in the first place. There's not really a way around that. Just bigger markets means more market discipline, means better companies, cheaper resources, more ready, cheaper labor, more human capital. Just having access to a global market confers so many benefits competitively to those people and firms that can navigate that successfully. And denying yourself that by cutting off from free trade or inhibiting it is going to have significant negative effects over the long term. Over the short term, they may not be that noticeable, but the penalties from being cut off will accrue and compound over time. So in the long run, they will definitely be noticeable. The Soviet Union, for example, was not necessarily that penalized by cutting itself off from most of the world's trade. For the first couple decades of existence, they were able to grow in spite of that economically pretty significantly. But over the long run, they could not compete with the West. Technologically speaking, we ran ahead of them by leaps and bounds technologically. And by the 1980s, they were way behind. And, I won't get into a whole thing about the reasons why communist societies lag technologically and economically. That's a whole conversation unto itself. It's not just because of free trade, but that is one of the major factors there. So that's another example of why cutting yourself off is going to hurt you. And it's going to force you into a position eventually where the only way to catch up is to engage in that same free trade that by denying yourself puts you in that disadvantaged position. So that's what I mean by inevitable. I'm not saying inevitable because I think it's like some great moral thing, or because I think the disruptions don't matter or whatever, that nobody gets hurt. I'm not advocating. I'm saying, like, just from my own objective analysis, my own attempt at objective analysis, I think that that's just the inevitable game theoretic inevitable outcome. By all means, do stuff to try to mitigate the damage. We should have been doing that a long time ago. I don't begrudge anybody who looks at all the disruption from free trade over the past couple decades and wants something to be done about it. Like, that's a big part of Trump's appeal. Mm-hmm. But the reason I don't like Trump is not because he wants to fix that. The reason I don't like Trump is because I don't think he has any real intention of fixing that. And I've seen no evidence in his campaign platform over the past 8-some years that leads me to believe that he has any real pathway to do that. And as always, I welcome feedback. Like, if I'm missing something or getting something like blatantly wrong here, do let me know. Like, we call it a conversation for a reason, right? A world discussion. So, let me know. Like, let me know what you think on that particular subject. But, just speaking as an economist, right, my perspective is that there's not really any way around it that's truly feasible over the long term. Mm-hmm. Hopefully some of that made sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, it made sense to me. I had a question just about kind of a general assessment of Kamala Harris and what people are going to say about her, kind of anticipating. If we think about politicians as people who follow build orders, Trump's build order for beating his opponent, which has worked for him in the past, at least for one election, is to create a kind of a negative archetype of whoever his opponent is and make that really funny and catchy, which he successfully did with who many people know as Sleepy Joe. They made a persona around Joe Biden as someone who is sleepy and unattentive and thus unfit for office. So what could possibly be used against Kamala Harris if she were to be the one to go against him?
I'm glad you asked, because I actually wrote up a set of notes just listing all of the vectors of attack that they could and probably will use. So, one, she was a senator from California, so immediately the full repertoire of Republican anti-California agitprop can be brought into play there. Everything wrong with California can be associated with Kamala Harris, and that's almost certainly exactly what they're going to do. So that'll be one big line of attack. One of the ones that's emerging, like, in the past couple days is that she does not have a mandate as the Democratic nominee, which sounds weird. You'd think the Republican Party wouldn't give a shit one way or the other. But they're arguing that the Democratic Party is ignoring its voters, that it doesn't actually care about democracy. She obviously was not elected or is not going to get the nomination. If she gets it by way of a primary, she's going to get it by way of support from delegates at the DNC. And so Republicans are saying that this represents the Democratic Party's dislike of democracy. They don't care about the people. And if you want to vote for a party that does care about your vote, you should vote for the Republican Party. So that's another line of attack, that she is coronated by the Democratic Party elite and not by the people of America.
Gotcha.
They'll probably try to go after her for experience. She has a lot of political experience, but I don't think she's ever held an executive office. She was a senator and she was a attorney general, I believe. I think some people mistakenly call her a DA, or maybe it's the other way around. I'll defer to chat on that. Please correct me. But I don't think she's ever been like a president, a governor, a mayor, what have you. So I don't think she's ever held an executive office. So they may home in on that so that they can contrast it with Trump, who obviously has been president, so can be said to have significant experience as holding executive authority.
Mm.
Guilt by association with Biden. So one of the things they're going to say is that she's not really actually different from Biden, like in any significant way. And so then by doing that, basically, they're going to try to take all of the negative perceptions and feeling that had existed in the body politic towards Joe Biden and try to shift that over onto Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, by dint of being part of the Biden administration, as vice president, there's reason to think that hypothetically she could come out and try to distinguish herself in that regard. But, again, the reason that Biden was nominated in the first place back in 2020 was because he was like this middle of the road, boring, moderate Democrat. And that's seen as like the strategic optimum as far as beating Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So that limits her maneuverability policy-wise. So I don't know that she's actually going to deviate that much from Biden in that regard. And so that means that this will probably be another successful avenue of attack for the GOP. In so much as people care about that, she is going to be painted as guilty, as part of the overall failed, quote-unquote, Biden administration, and that she should be judged as such.
Gotcha. So she's responsible for the failings of Biden in that sense, to their perspective.
Yeah,
somewhat.
Yeah. They say it was all a shit show and that she was part of it and that she should be held accountable for that.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before, but early in the Biden administration, she was given responsibility for trying to handle the border crisis. And obviously that has not gone well. So the fact that she had responsibility for that portfolio is definitely going to be used against her. It's probably the Democrats' weakest issue. So you can look. I think already they've started attacking her for that. I think Donald Trump himself was posting about the Democrats trying to make the Biden administration's immigration czar the next president of the United States. So for people whom are really dialed into immigration as an issue, that'll probably be pretty effective. Regardless, that'll be, again, another avenue of attack. One of the problems Kamala Harris had early in the Biden administration was she had a lot of staff turnover. I don't know that we know for sure, but the reporting suggested that there was a lot of difficulties managing personnel, and the suggestion was that it was because she had a really overbearing, grating personality. Mm-hmm. So you'll probably hear a lot about that as well, that she's not good with people, can't manage people, can't hold down a stable office, and they'll probably try to contrast that with criticism of Trump, right? Trump was criticized heavily for having a lot of turnover in his administration. And of course, the criticism of Trump at the time is that a steadier hand would have been better. And so, the pro-Trump crowd, and specifically the GOP, is going to respond now and saying, well, your guy isn't any better this time. Mm-hmm. That's about all I had. The only other thing I had was unsubstantive, which is that she kind of looks like the Joker when she smiles. I've seen some people posting some stuff about that on Reddit.
Yeah, I did hear that people were making fun of the way that she laughs, which it's a very non-political angle of attack if you're assessing a person's ability to lead a country. But yeah, charisma is definitely a thing. I haven't really watched her talk enough to get a sense of like what's her charisma level versus say Trump, and obviously it depends somewhat on your persuasions and what kind of speech you would consider to be charismatic, because the way that Trump talks is very charismatic to a certain kind of person, but very uncharismatic to others. So, to me, when I hear Trump talking, maybe you'll see some of my bias here. I don't think of someone who's very smart. I feel like he's very quick at pulling people's attention around and pushing their buttons in such a way that he seems brave and authentic, when really he's understanding which kind of buttons people like pushed. Especially the Christian one, I think, is maybe the most offensive. I was very active in my church growing up. Well, I placed a lot of value in being a part of a church community and also just trying to live in a Christ-like manner. And to lie about one's love for the Bible is one of the gravest sins. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm not really Christian or whatever. I don't really go to church much, or I haven't really read the Bible. But to say that the Bible is your favorite book, like, I would be scared even as an ex-Christian to say stuff like that dishonestly, just because of how seriously a lot of people take their faith. But he's the kind of guy who doesn't care. He wants attention and he wants to win. That's all he wants. So if you understand that those are his guideposts, then for him to say that he loves the Bible and it's his favorite book and he prays all the time and he's the most Christian person on the planet, like, that's going to make some people who don't think about it very excited.
Okay.
He's one of us. He's the chosen one.
And it gets down to it, just a game of symbols and talking points when you get down to it.
Mm-hmm. Setting points. How do you think she would do against him in a debate?
I have no idea, honestly.
Fair.
I mean, if you're a Democrat, especially an anti-Trump Democrat, which is pretty much all of them, I guess, but you would say, if you listened to her debate, that she did well. Because I actually did hear some of her debate against Mike Pence from back when. And yeah, if you're a Democrat, you would listen to that and say, oh, she won that debate.
Mm-hmm. So well enough to sway their side, but maybe not the center.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm driving at. Like, one of the criticisms on the right of Harris in that debate is that she was kind of a chuckle fuck, like you mentioned. Like, she just kind of laughs at inappropriate times and weirdly. That's definitely something she needs to work on, because I think for people that are Democrats, that's not a big deal. But I know a lot of people who are like rural moderate types who don't really like that. They prefer their politicians to be very serious and solemn. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a minor aesthetic point against her. But as we've noted before, like, politics is largely a superficial game of perceptions. And given how tight the election is, and given that it's exactly those types of like moderate centrists that are going to decide the election, it's their tastes she needs to cater to. So she's going to have to cut that out, or she's going to be penalized for it.
Kamala, we understand you're trying your best, but you need to laugh less, because politics is very serious and you can't laugh about it. Okay.
Oh, just another point here that I thought of. This is not going to be something the GOP criticizes her for per se, but it is something they're going to secretly criticize her for. Normally, you know, when a party criticizes the other candidate, it's because you want to convert people to vote for your guy. But sometimes you'll do criticisms that are specifically targeted to lower turnout for the other party. So this line of criticism basically is going to focus on her time as an attorney general or district attorney. Again, I can't remember which it was. But she was picked as VP specifically because she was a relatively centrist, moderate Democrat. And her time as an attorney general reflected that. And so I think even on Reddit today, I saw a video posted of her talking about how the idea that more money should be spent on education and less on jails was wrong-headed. You can probably guess how that'll go down. So there's going to be a lot more agitprop like that that's posted specifically to undermine support amongst progressive Democrats to try to split the coalition and reduce turnout. So that'll be another line of attack right there.
But it seems like it's still early enough that a lot of different things could happen.
Oh yeah, for sure. Nobody knows what's going to happen. It's a total crapshoot at this point. I mean, historical precedent is not encouraging. I was hearing the other day on the radio that pretty much all of the times that the Democratic Party has gone to a contested election have resulted in a failed election bid.
Mm-hmm.
So, not very encouraging in that regard. But, it's the 2020s, so who knows? Could go any which way at this point. I really want to see polling for swing states. I want to see how she does after the next debate and over the course of her next, month plus of public appearances. After all that, I want to see polling done in swing states and look at that. And then I think I'll have a much stronger opinion about how she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, it's just wide open.
Gotcha.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
We had there's going to be 2 presidential debates this year, and in one of them it was Trump Biden, and then in the next one it's going to be Trump versus somebody completely different.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever happened before. Wild times.
Indeed. I think a lot of people felt happy in the sense that the Democrats will field a, quote, less establishment candidate, or at least someone who is less old and attached to stuff as Biden. But like you said, because she was in his administration, of everyone else in the field, she's going to be the most like him. But demographically speaking, I don't know if she's going to capture the same demographics as Biden did, or if she does, like, who is the running mate that makes her as viable as possible as a candidate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's been set or not yet.
No, it's still too early. I don't think she'll pick a VP until after she's secured the nomination. So we're not going to know until probably the DNC ends. And that's not going to happen, like mid-August, again, whatever it is. So we're probably not going to know at least until the end of August, I would guess. And then after that, it'll be, September, October, November. So then you'll have about 3 months to go. And then things will run from there, and it'll be very dramatic, I'm sure. This isn't it, by the way. I said it the last time when we were talking about the assassination attempt, and I'll say it again now. There's plenty more drama to come, guys. This is not going to be it. I told you the assassination wouldn't be the defining characteristic of the campaign, and I'm here to tell you again, this ain't going to be it either.
More memes to come.
Oh, yeah. Oh, by the way, I think I messaged you earlier, but I'll say it again here publicly because it's worth repeating. You were so lucky to have grown up in such an absolute drop-dead gorgeous city.
Oh, yeah, Seattle.
Yeah.
Yep. It has a lot of character to it. It doesn't really feel like a copy-pasta commercial place like a lot of other cities do.
Yeah, very pretty. I definitely enjoyed the scenery.
Awesome. Glad you had fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any main sites that you hit that I would recognize?
Katy Park.
Don't know if I went there, but I went to a lot of parks, so maybe.
It's got a really good view of downtown. It's like on top of a cliff or something, so you can get a nice panorama of the bay, the city, whatnot. So that was very pretty. I was right next to the Space Needle. Did not go inside. I had no desire to go up the Space Needle. That is unreasonably high. But I was in the area under it. They've got like a whole park area there. Yeah, I saw, what is it? Djibouti's Glass Museum?
Oh, yeah, Djibouti's. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was very nice. Very impressed with the glass work. I was able to buy a shirt there because I didn't pack enough, so I took the opportunity to buy a Seattle Kraken shirt.
Nice.
Quite pleased with that. Cheap one. It's a Fanatic. I read last week that Fanatics apparently has a bad reputation as a shirt manufacturer, so I don't have high expectations as far as how long the shirt is going to last, but I was happy to get a Kraken shirt while I was up there. I actually did see a actual Seattle Kraken jersey for sale at one of the stores, but it was like $138. I was like, no, we're not doing that. It's out of my price range.
It's a bit steep.
Yeah. Other than that, we mostly just kind of ate out. My friends hosted me.
That's cool.
They're doing pretty well, so they took us to some nice places.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Seattle has a lot of really good food and a lot of different kinds of food.
Oh, yeah. And they lived in a nice area kind of out in the hills, so got to see some nature, which was very cool. Got to spend some time in Bellevue.
Yep.
Which is very nice. And very fucking hilly.
Yep.
I did not enjoy that. I was so tired.
Seattle is all one hill, kind of like San Francisco almost.
Yeah. I really can't tell if the muscle pains I had by the end of the trip were just from overexertion walking the hills or from the COVID. Probably both. Combine that with the neck pain from sleeping on an air mattress all week. I was in pretty bad shape.
Oh, damn. Hey, that's traveling for you.
Yeah. I knew I would get sick from the word go. I always do when I fly. So it goes.
Indeed.
I wouldn't have minded that. What I was unprepared for was my lack of a butt pillow, which is an actual thing you can get for flights. It's like a pillow designed for your butt to sit on, and it prevents your tailbone from getting sore during long flights. Yeah, that's not a problem for you thin guys, Neuro, but when you're a fat ass like me, all that extra weight really makes your tailbone sore after a couple of hours, and it can be very uncomfortable because there's basically no position you can sit in that'll help you with it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was really squirming in my seat by the end of the flight. I should have learned from the last time I flew, but that was so long ago I'd forgotten. So hopefully I'll remember the next time.
Butt pillow. I didn't even know this exists.
Yeah. Definitely recommend there if you're obese. Or, you could just lose weight. That's probably the healthier option there. But if you can't, if there's not enough time to lose 50 to 100 pounds or whatever, go with the butt pillow.
Butt pillow or diet. Your two main options.
Seafood was really good. Yeah, I had some oysters. Those were quite nice. I was surprised by how small they were, but I guess that was because it was like a fancy restaurant.
You're a Texan, though. You expect better stuff to be bigger. That's more of a Texas.
Yeah, Big Shucks Oyster Bar by UT Dallas had nice, big, fat oysters. Probably full of like petroleum shit from the Gulf of Mexico, but I guess it only added to the taste because I did enjoy them.
Maybe you could visit his cousin Little Shuck in Seattle.
Me too. Yeah, I'll try to be more fit so that if I get the chance to go back, I can be a little more healthy on the trip back. Well, what else did we have here? Oh, did you see the Republican National Convention?
I did not. How did that go?
It was entertaining. My last day in Seattle, I was sick, and so I had to skip out on the dinner everybody else went to. So I spent several hours listening to the NPR coverage, live coverage, I point out, of the RNC. So I got to hear a lot of the speeches as they were given, which was interesting, to put it mildly. I was pretty shocked, along with much of the crowd, from what I gathered listening, that the head of the Teamsters Union actually came to speak at the Republican National Convention. First time that's ever happened.
What is the Teamsters Union?
The Teamsters Union is a union of people that do things like help people move and, other kinds of physical labor. You don't really see it in the South much, if at all, but it's definitely a thing up north. And as you can imagine, being a major union, they've been solidly Democratic leaning for pretty much their entire existence, which is over 100 years, I think. But their head came out and spoke at the RNC and spoke quite favorably of Trump, which kind of surprised the hell out of everybody.
Interesting.
He did not actually endorse Trump, which I thought was kind of weird. I don't know. Why do you go to the Republican National Convention and then not endorse Trump? That's kind of the only reason, but it's kind of an olive branch type moment, I guess, and there is some common ground in so much as they're both interested in American workers, quote unquote. Let's see, what else was there? There was also the fireman effigy. So the guy who was killed during the Trump assassination attempt was a retired fireman. Mm-hmm. And so at the RNC, they had a fireman's outfit, like a uniform, and a fireman's helmet together, like they had it set up. And Trump kissed the helmet, if I'm remembering correctly. I didn't see it. I was listening on the radio, but that was my understanding. And so kind of a hokey political moment there for the cameras. Have you at least heard about Hulk Hogan?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So I think he tore a shirt off, which is one of the things that he's good at. He's been a bit of a wily public personality for a bit now. I can't remember what he did, but he did something that got him semi-canceled. I don't know if it was his TV show or what have you.
I remember there was the sex tape.
Maybe that's what it was.
I don't think anybody wants to see that tape. It's not going to have the same effect it had on Kardashian. Mm-hmm. Very different.
What did he do exactly? Just he was very hyped and cheering on Trump.
Oh yeah, he came out, gave some pro-Trump rhetoric, the usual stuff. It was just kind of, again, it was just hokey. Typical convention stuff, you expect conventions to be hokey, but a lot of people online were making jokes referencing Idiocracy, because the president of the United States in Idiocracy was a former wrestler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What was it? President Kamala?
Yeah.
Yeah. Same deal. How I missed the innocence of the aughts. They had no idea what was coming.
You guys don't realize how correct you are.
Yeah, the only other note as far as stuff that happened was he kind of talked a little bit about immigration, no surprise. But I thought it was weird that he brought up El Salvador disparagingly, because a lot of conservatives in the U.S. kind of see El Salvador pretty positively. Mm-hmm. The president / dictator of El Salvador, Bukele.
He's the coolest one, right?
Yeah, he's the coolest dictator on earth. Gotcha. Same guy. So, he's kind of popular for successfully clamping down on crime and getting it much, much lower. And in turn, emigration out of El Salvador into the United States has fallen significantly correspondingly. So, in general, the Republican Party, and especially a lot of the activists and convention goers are, pretty pro El Salvador. But Trump started talking about how there was a president in Central America, and he eventually did mention El Salvador specifically, that said that they were reducing crime by, quote unquote, training criminals, but that in reality he was dumping criminals on the United States. And I don't think anybody had any idea what the fuck he meant by training. That's the first I've ever heard about that. Anybody familiar with Bukele in El Salvador knows that there was just blanket sweeping arrests, and that huge swaths of the gang population were just shoveled into a maximum security prison that was built specifically for the purpose of holding, huge numbers of gangsters. So that's nothing to do with training, I assure you. And I don't think there's any other Central American country that he could have been confusing it for, because I don't think anybody's like training prisoners like that, or former gang members, what have you. So I'm not sure why he homed in on El Salvador. It seemed like a really weird choice. I think the real answer is that he was just kind of riffing, just kind of speaking off the cuff, and just wanted to talk about immigration from Central America, and that he just thought of a random country in the region and went with it without really thinking about it. I mean, that's his speaking style, right? It would not be that surprising. So that seems like the most likely scenario. I guess he could have been talking about like Nicaragua or Cuba or something, because those are countries that kind of low-key are encouraging, to a degree, migration into the United States. But the issue there is that I don't know why he would think that they said that they were training prisoners, former gangsters. They definitely haven't done that. You know, they basically all but tell the United States to go fuck itself. They don't really justify themselves to Washington. So just weird rhetoric, I thought. It seemed strange to me. If he had not mentioned El Salvador, I would not have thought anything about it. You know, I just would have written it off as riffing. But the choice of El Salvador in particular kind of caught my ear. But yeah, as far as overall implications of the RNC, like nothing of substance. You know, you really don't expect much of substance out of a convention, and you know they pretty much delivered as far as that went.
That makes sense. I would guess the DNC is going to be more, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but less predictable.
That's putting it mildly. There was one analyst on the radio who said that if it does go to an open convention, then it's going to be like reality TV like you've never seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be good, because the strategy in the 2020s has been to be as obnoxious as possible. So that's one thing that a lot of people were, I don't know how many headlines I saw about this, but it was like, Trump's mad he's not getting attention. Trump's mad that he got shot at but isn't getting attention. Kamala Harris is taking all of his attention and he's mad. It's like, I don't know how mad he would actually get about that, but it is definitely a thing that, because the public attention span is so short, you can fuck up in a bunch of different ways, but if you dazzle them in the next 5 minutes, then suddenly they're worshiping the ground you walk on again. So same thing with the Democratic Party. They have an opportunity to catch people's attention, maybe make something of it, maybe not.
Yeah, we shall see. I didn't have too much else. The leader of Vietnam died, which is going to be a big deal because he didn't really have a clear-cut successor. It's been a lot of drama in Vietnamese politics the past couple of years over that. So we'll see how everything finally does shake out now that he's gone. But long story short, you could be reading about Vietnam in the news if there's discord that results. Let's see. Did you were you impacted at all by the crowd strike thing?
No, what's that?
No, the big IT outage that happened over the weekend?
No, I heard about that though. Some airlines didn't fly, right? That's what that was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were a couple airlines that were disproportionately affected because it impacted their ability to, you know, plan out and organize the flights and whatnot. But it wasn't just airlines. It was just huge swaths of the planet were affected. Like anybody running Windows, or at least a relatively recent version of Windows was affected. You know, shit tons of people had the blue screen of death. Some people in China were jokingly thanking Microsoft for giving them an early vacation.
That's funny.
Didn't impact my trip home at all because I was flying Southwest.
Yeah, I saw that they weren't affected at all for some reason.
Yeah, just probably using old tech, old operating system, so no effect. Yeah, not maintaining up-to-date modern stuff actually paid off for them for once.
Yeah.
Penny pinching and whatnot.
Well, haven't you said that a lot of like government systems and stuff are older for that reason too? So just more difficult
Yeah.
to interfere with.
Yeah, as far as like national security, one of the reasons that some of the older systems have not been updated is because they are more secure. Since being more analog, they're effectively immune from, digital internet-based hacking of
Mm-hmm.
one kind or another. I think the system by which nuclear missiles are launched is a case in point. I think they still use like floppy disks or some shit for that.
That's crazy. That makes sense though.
Yeah.
You can't hack me. You need a floppy disk.
Let's see. China had its third plenum recently, but there wasn't really anything of note to report. Basically, the only thing people were watching for in the analytical community was whether or not there would be substantive efforts to change course economically and to actually implement reforms that were aimed at shifting more towards a consumption-driven economy, but it didn't happen. So, no change there. Not unexpected. I think, really, there's not much the Chinese government could do as far as public policy that would appease economists at this point. Because honestly, nobody really knows for sure how to decisively shift an economy towards a consumption-based model. It's just not something like we know the mechanics of.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, the Chinese government should do that, but nobody realistically knows how, so I don't really begrudge them too much for not really focusing on that. And keep in mind, too, the big priority for the government is, one, keeping the party in power, so political security is more important than economic growth. And two, and more important here, excuse me, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah, economic security is paramount. So, yes, it would be ideal to focus on generating growth, but the party is more concerned about dependencies on the U.S., economic dependencies on the U.S. being exploited by Washington, and more specifically by a potential second Trump administration to hurt China and its economic growth, the party, what have you. So the party is very attuned to that possibility, and so they've been focused since the first Trump administration on trying to maximize, as much as possible anyway, their economic independence in core strategic areas from the United States. And that has come at the expense of developing other areas of the economy that probably would have generated more growth, but I think that's a trade-off the party is pretty happy to make, especially given the level of uncertainty in American politics and with regard to American foreign policy. So, yes, I agree with my fellow economists that economic reforms in China are needed and that the party is not really prioritizing them, but speaking more as a political economist, it actually makes total sense that they're doing that, so it doesn't really surprise me. So yeah, were there any questions or anything you wanted to get to?
There might have been questions. Oh, there's one right now. What does agents been thinking about the estimation that China's population decline is undercounted, as they see fewer kids registering for kindergarten than they expected?
That's possible. I think it's really hard to determine just exactly how large it is because the government doesn't want to be forthright about it. But even the government's own numbers could be skewed. I mean, political culture in China is notoriously corrupt historically. So if the party creates a political incentive for low-level officials to inflate their population numbers, then the overall numbers probably will be inflated, but it's going to be almost impossible to gauge by how much.
Mm-hmm.
So your guess is as good as mine as far as how much China's population may be greater or lower than reported. I have no way to tell that for sure. But most likely it is overestimated, would be my guess. I think I would agree with that much. But I couldn't tell you by how much. Certainly I would be dubious about something like school enrollment data, because I don't know how complete that data would be. The party, I don't know that the party would care that much about censoring that data, but at the same time, who's collating that? Do they, the party considers it espionage to basically take public data or data relevant to public policy out of China. So pretty much all of that data is going to be hard to get for outsiders, and even among insiders, like, I don't know that anybody's actually gathering it in a rigorous way. I guess the real answer to the question is I don't know. I don't know how to estimate the error term for estimates of China's population. India is a little more forthright about that, so I would trust their numbers more. But even in India, like, there's a lack of administrative capacity, there's corruption, there's other problems there that would undermine even their estimate. So, when it comes to just counting heads, that number in the hundreds of millions, you're going to have errors regardless. But you throw in the political incentives like what China has, then yeah, it's going to be larger.
Yeah,
not the sexiest of answers.
It's all good. Yeah, I don't know how you're feeling. I don't want to press you too much on your recovery time, but I am down if you want to BG3 a little bit in our room.
Oh, yeah, I can do that. I was doing that the other day. That's not hard. A lot of it is muscle memory at this point, so you don't even necessarily have to think too much.
What does Agent Smith think about TikTok?
I don't. I don't use it. I don't care about it. I'm very much of the school of thought that that the impact of social media is way overblown. So I don't really invest much concern into the effect of firms like TikTok. It doesn't faze me. Mm-hmm. So, some people want to get rid of it because they think it's like an outlet for Chinese propaganda or whatever, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. I don't think, even if it were an outlet of that variety, it would not have much of an impact. I love fancy restaurants because they have like the craziest shit on their menus.
What did you see on your trip?
I didn't just see it. We tried it because my friends are Chinese, right? And so in Chinese culture, they have this sharing culture when they eat, where the family will go out to eat, people will buy a bunch of stuff, and then everybody just shares their food. Mm-hmm. So we did that, and one of the things we tried while we were out was bacon wrapped dates. Yeah. So the dates were cooked, some whatever way, I don't even remember, and they were wrapped in really spicy bacon. Yeah, it was a really neat idea. I actually really liked it. I was just really surprised by how spicy it ended up being. Yeah, I thought, oh yeah, that'll just be like mildly spicy, and it was not mildly spicy. But definitely a strong recommend. I could never afford to go to that place on my own, so I appreciate the opportunity. And probably a lot of people listening can't afford it, but if you ever do find yourself in a position to try something like bacon wrapped dates, I recommend it. Give that a try. The homemade hot pot was much cheaper and very tasty.
Hot pot.
Oh yeah, good stuff. Strong recommend. Have you ever had it?
Yes, that's... Is that where you cook the stuff in front of you?
Yeah, but that could also describe Korean barbecue.
True, yeah. It's a big pot with stuff that's hot, and you choose what ingredients you throw in, and it's kind of like a soup that you make, and then you usually scoop stuff out of it, yeah.
Yeah, you got it. You nailed it.
Cool.
Yeah, depending on the spice you use, it can be very good.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't spice it, it's a little bland, in my opinion.
And Chinese food has a specific kind of spicy that's different from Mexican spicy. I can't really describe. It's got like a tang spiciness to it.
Yeah,
But
so there's a couple different types of spice in China. They've actually got different words for them. But I think the one you're talking about is Sichuan peppercorn. That's the numbing spice.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually the one I requested. They asked me, before I went on the trip, they asked me, like, hey, what do you want to eat? You know, we'd be happy to treat you. And I said, actually, I'd really like some hot pot. And they asked me about spices, and I said, definitely Sichuan peppercorns. Really enjoy the numbing spice.
Mm-hmm. It's a weird feeling.
Yeah.
Normal spice doesn't do that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Got to try that in Chengdu when I was in Sichuan. So I was very fortunate. It was even better there.
Cool.
I'll point out again that I am not wealthy. Like, all of this stuff was just pure luck.
You were a guest.
Yeah, I was a guest. So, you know, I'm not saying, like, oh, yeah, all you people, like, living on minimum wage, just fly out to Sichuan and try this stuff. It's really good. Like, no. But if you are lucky enough to get the opportunity, definitely do try to make time.
Yeah, chat's saying the kind of going back to the blue screen issue, was a thing called CrowdStrike. It was a company, and it caused it to blue screen once because it had kernel access, and then blue screen again once it booted up. So, yeah. Double blue screen. People were probably sweating, unsure what to do. Not the best patch they pushed.
Yeah, well, it's more a problem for the IT department. For everybody else, it's an excuse to fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else's problem.
Well, chat, do we have any final questions before we wrap the world discussion, move to some Faerun or Baldur's Gate?
Sounds good to me.
We'll give them a few minutes. I don't think we had to ban anyone. Chat's been surprisingly well behaved with the political stuff, but there's still time.
Yeah, and there's always the YouTube comments.
Yeah. We did... you go ahead.
I feel sorry for that guy. A couple weeks ago, he was just trying to post, like, some criticisms, and he ended up posting it, like, 30 times, because he thought YouTube wasn't posting it, because he didn't see it immediately.
Oh, yeah. By the way, if you are watching this segment from YouTube right now and your comments are getting removed, I'm not doing that. I think some people have thought that I'm, like, controlling information and trying to make sure everyone is one political leaning in my comments. YouTube has an automated algorithm for making contents hidden that is not based on me. And I think a lot of the stuff is related to guns, violence, and politics. So any of those buzzwords, you might be using them in a way that you consider to be wholesome and productive and good conversation, but YouTube will catch those. So I'm not deleting your comments almost all the time. I think I've maybe deleted like 3 or 4 comments ever on my channel over 12 years. So if you're getting lots of comments that are removed, maybe try to talk around what you're trying to point at if you think it's too spicy of language.
It's not even necessarily spicy language, because I've had comments that I posted on some of the YouTube videos that did not end up posted. And the only thing I could do to actually get those messages posted was to actually change my account login for Google. Like, to this day, I can't get my John Smith Gmail account to post on the YouTube videos. I finally just gave up and started using a different account, and then it started working. So those messages were not, like, incendiary in any way. Just Google, for some reason, thinks that account is like a spam account or something. I don't even really know. Google's auto censor bots, whatever they are just very mercurial. I think that's what it comes down to. So it's not Neuro censoring you. It's not the power elite censoring you. It's just a poorly programmed bot working for YouTube, basically. So
unless the power elites are directing the poorly run bots.
could be. But yeah, just when you post stuff on YouTube, just keep in mind it's not going to post right away. It might take as much of a day to actually show up. So, just keep that in mind so you don't accidentally like spam 40 times the same message in the comment thread.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't see it after that, then maybe just try changing accounts, and that could work. So that's my own experience.
Yep. And as a reminder, I'm never really trying to silence dissent. If I have opinion on something and you want to be, say, for example, a measured and intelligent and respectful conservative on a matter, by all means, post your heart's content. Let me know what you think, because you might be right about something that I'm wrong about. So feel free to weigh in and share whatever information that you have. The only criteria is you want to try to be respectful and talk about the issues at play rather than attacking people too much directly. There was one question from Fuzzy Cord for you. There's a lot of backlash related to the general perception that the world has become too complicated and has left some people behind. Is this best addressed by education, better redistributive policies, or something else?
Yeah, I think one of the big problems that the modern world has is that there's just been too much change too quickly. Structural economic change, of course, we've talked about that plenty before. But even just like wrapping our heads around all of the changes that have been made socially, politically, economically, have been hard to track and comprehend. Mm-hmm. And I think that's created that's created political demand for people with easy, comprehensible answers for a lot of these incomprehensible problems. And that's led people not only on the right, but also on the left, all across the political spectrum, to seek out people like that. Mm-hmm. I would point out that it's pure historical happenstance that populism ended up ascendant on the right with the Republican Party and not the left with the Democratic Party. It could have happened the other way around, depending on candidate. Like if there had been a Trumpian figure that had successfully, effectively hijacked the Democratic Party, we would probably be looking at a political polarity in the United States that was flipped on its head, mm-hmm. with very similar dynamics, but with parties filling opposite roles. So it just kind of happened that Trump went Republican and was able to corner that market. As far as what to do about it, like education, sure, yeah. Redistribution, yeah. I think that would also help. But, I would point out that's in general what most countries have done to try to deal with structural economic change. Like in Europe, social democracy was the answer to industrialization, but that's not necessarily the answer for the United States. We have a unique political culture in the West that kind of venerates work and individual initiative. And I don't think that's the result of like Fox News or, machinations by media manipulation by the right, convincing people to vote against their interests. I think that is just a core cultural belief for a lot of people on the right in the United States. Republican free labor ideology has roots going all the way back to the early 1800s. So I think even if you educated people like fully and whatnot and had like all of the things that reformers want to have, you would still see a huge swath of the American population choose to be and embrace conservative republicanism, because for them that is desirable. That is a desirable ideology and vision for the United States.
Yeah, well, they see it as meritocratic. I think the term that was lovingly used for my family and bubble growing up was that's the Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
Where it's,
that's a good way to put it.
It's about kind of going back to the principle of faith without works is dead. So if you really believe in something, you should be working hard at it, even if you think you have God's favor, which is a little bit different from feeling like you deserve certain things, like you're entitled to be part of the nobility. For example, that was one thing that permeated a lot of people's perception of class, was that noble people or the gentry or whatever refined people were just a different kind of person that deserved to be separate. Whereas one of the more fundamental American ideas that took root, I think especially in a lot of Yankeedom, was anyone can do a good job and make decisions so long as they're informed enough. or it was more education based and more work based rather than your status. Yeah, we'll see. See how much the world changes.
I would add here that one of the central tensions in American politics that remains unresolved and is a major driver of populism is that we're kind of at a point in terms of the structure of the economy where we basically just can't deal with the problems that are faced by the working class, specifically like people with high school level education who are trying to make a living in the modern American economy. Which is very difficult, obviously, given all the changes that have happened. We're kind of past the point where we can deal with that in any way that does not involve redistribution, right? Like, a lot of people want to believe that we can deregulate the economy and otherwise introduce more competition, and that'll generate growth and create opportunities for people. And there are areas where you can kind of do that, but for the most part, you can't deregulate your way out of this. But people reject redistribution, again, for the reasons I already pointed out. So how can you create opportunities for the working class in the United States without redistribution in a economy that is designed and evolved to compete globally in such a way where American labor is at a distinct disadvantage? And I think the only way that this ends up resolved is de facto redistribution that is labeled as competition, specifically free market competition. So basically, they're going to lie to people. Politicians are going to do, for example, tariff hikes is kind of an example of that. Like, let's say hypothetically that Trump gets reelected, hikes tariffs, and creates more competition, reduces trade such that there's an incentive to produce more stuff in the United States, and let's say that actually happens, that represents redistribution. Like, you're effectively making everybody, the vast majority of consumers in the United States, pay more for a whole range of goods, potentially all of the goods that are currently imported, if Trump actually follows through on his promise to raise tariffs across the board. You're going to make the vast majority of people in the United States pay more to benefit a very small portion of the population, because the number of jobs generated from that are not going to be nearly enough for everybody in the working class. It'll just be a subset of that subset. So that would be redistribution. That is government intervention, but they won't paint it as such. They'll say that competition with the world is unfair. So actually, this is still genuine hard work that deserves to be considered in the same league as previous eras of work when there was no such redistribution or protections. So that's the kind of thing they're going for. By the way, I would point out here that this is just a hypothetical example. I don't really think it would play out like that if Trump actually did hike tariffs. I don't think there's going to be a major renaissance in American manufacturing, almost regardless of what either Trump or potentially President Harris or whoever the hell the Democrats end up nominating, whatever they do. The structural factors at play in the global economy and in the American economy are a major barrier to a major resurgence in American manufacturing. And when I say resurgence here, I'm talking in the terms of populists. When they talk about a resurgence in manufacturing, they're talking almost exclusively in terms of jobs. They want a major increase in the number of good middle-class manufacturing jobs in the United States, which would be a good thing. I'm not opposed to that. Don't misunderstand me. But the issue is that those jobs basically just can't come back. Like, that's not competitive for manufacturers to produce in the United States. American labor is too expensive, and the markets that you can compete in would be pretty much limited just to the United States. And that's only if tariffs actually had the desired effect, which they probably won't. They probably would, in the case of broad-based tariffs, just be massive smuggling. The arbitrage opportunities would be immense, and the money that could be made would almost ensure invariably that any attempt to stop it would fail. You can already see how bad the government is at dealing with people crossing the border. Certainly with drugs crossing the border, it's not going to play out any differently if things like cars or other parts or electronics are cheaper abroad than they can be gotten inside the United States. That stuff will just get smuggled in and will undermine any attempt to establish manufacturing of those kinds of goods in the U.S. That's my economist in me talking. Many years of training beating into me the mathematical efficiency of free trade.
Mm-hmm. Chat right now is talking about the packaging of information and how that matters a lot for whether it sounds like a good policy, because you can have socialist policies that are completely socialist in nature, but they benefit someone. But if you don't say the naughty word socialism, they might think that it's good. But if you brand something as communism, even if it isn't communism, by virtue of you calling it that, they will find it revolting. So
yeah, I mean, that has its limits. You can only get away with that so to certain degrees. But yeah, in general, if you like something, if you want something, then you can engage in a wide variety of mental gymnastics in order to justify getting it, even if it runs completely counter to everything you allegedly believe in. And then the flip side is also true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't like something, then you can find reasons to dislike it, even if it's technically congruent with the things you believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I don't think much is going to change now that Biden has left the race overall. You know, if Harris wants to prove me wrong, by all means, but people have predisposed biases. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if they are inclined not to like, say, Harris, certainly if they're inclined not to like Trump, for example, it doesn't really matter what evidence you present to them. They're going to find reasons not to like them. Mm-hmm. So, for example, people talked a lot about Biden's age. He's too old to be president. Well, now that he's gone, what you're going to find is that age isn't really a factor anymore. Because in reality, a lot of people, not everybody, some people were genuinely concerned, but a lot of people were just using that as an excuse to justify their pre-existing dislike for Biden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an easy angle of attack.
Yeah.
One more silly question before we wrap up. Agent Smith, I watched The Matrix for the first time yesterday. No jokes, and now I understand your name. So can we get an Agent Smith full deep dive on all the Matrix movies, a review of the entire story?
I'm going to say something that you're going to find very, very disappointing, which is that I am not, in fact, named after Agent Smith from The Matrix.
What?
It's true. Yeah, when we first started the segment here, you asked me, like, what pen name did you want to use? You know, what fake anonymous name? Mm-hmm. Or you asked me if I wanted to use a fake anonymous name, and I was like, yes, please. But I'm terrible with names. I'm not creative, so I just went with John Smith. Mm-hmm. And so then Neuro, being the showman that he is, spun that into Agent Smith.
So I gave him his agent title.
Yeah, but it was not originally like meant to be a reference to The Matrix. I was just being lazy and going with the blandest possible anonymous name.
It's okay. Now that means that it's my job to do the Matrix movie deep dive.
Yeah. And I haven't even seen the latest Matrix movies. I think, there was like one relatively recently with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, I didn't see it's like the fourth one, I guess. They brought back a lot of the old cast, but not Morpheus. So it felt wrong to me to watch it because they didn't have the same Morpheus, but maybe it was good. Who knows?
But I did see the other three. The first one is a classic, of course. Mm-hmm. The second one was weaker. I mean, the second and third one are like notoriously weak. I don't want to say outright bad per se.
They're good movies. It's just not quite as groundbreaking as the first one. It's really hard to match that, and it wasn't all part of at least as cohesive a story as, say, Lord of the Rings was, where it already was meant to lead up towards something. It sort of changed a lot of the fundamentals of the movie when you got into the second one, where it kind of blurred the line of, okay, what's the difference between technology and magic here?
Yeah.
So it ended up being a different universe than the first movie really set up.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't entirely pleased with that. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the third movie was a little too up its own ass for its own good.
Yeah. Well,
I appreciated them being creative and philosophical and whatnot, but they didn't really go anywhere with it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that to me made the first one so good and so groundbreaking was they didn't really seem to break any of the laws of physics, at least for my suspension of disbelief. To me, it seemed like, cool, this guy has a very intuitive way of interacting with computers, which gives him basically God gamer power in this space, but he's not actually breaking any laws of physics because they're setting up as a fundamental that it's your imagination that dictates what you can do within the world. So within the first movie, he doesn't really break any laws of physics technically because he's in the computer world. So you see all that cool stuff happen. It's like, wow, what a gamer god. That's so cool. And then in the second and third movies, he's out of that world, and then he's like shooting electrical magic, and you're like, what? Okay. It just seems like a different set of magic than was set up in the first movie, which was just computer science, pretty much. So all the computer science nerds who are really happy about that first movie got disappointed in the second movie, where it's like, actually, yes, Neo is magic. And it ends up being more of like a standard spiritual story, which has been told many times and is very fun and satisfying to watch, of the chosen one is here to save the humans from oppression. Like, we've heard that many times, and how you package that can change the flavor somewhat. But yeah, first Matrix movie, very legendary. Second and third, okay movies.
Now that said, strong recommend for the Animatrix. That was very good.
I think I need to watch that still. I don't know if I've seen it.
Oh my god, you haven't? Oh, definitely give it a try if you haven't.
Cool.
It's very good. It's really the direction I wished they'd gone with the other two movies. Like, if they had made the Matrix sequels just anime movies, that would have been perfect. That would have been so good.
Did you see they're making a Lord of the Rings anime?
Why?
It's the War of the Rohirrim or something.
All right.
I'm not super against it. Have you seen Vinland Saga?
Oh, I've heard of that. I've heard a lot of good reviews about that.
Yeah, it's very good. It's like a super violent, super realistic-ish Viking anime. I guess super realistic is too charitable. It's realistic in the sense that it has a lot of farming between the fights. So it feels immersive to the world at that time. The combat itself is not realistic in that you'll have a 10-foot tall dude smashing through 40 people at once. It's played up like an anime is. But yeah, I've seen the War of the Rohirrim stuff, and it looks pretty decent.
Well, cool. Best of luck to them. Hopefully it goes better than the remake that they were doing. Haven't seen that either, but I haven't heard good things about it.
The Hunt for Golem or whatever?
Is that what it was? I thought they were doing like a full Lord of the Rings remake, but for TV.
Oh, there's the Rings of Power, which is not a remake. It's like more focused on the elves and I think the Second Age.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't been following it too closely, so I may be talking out of my ass.
That's okay.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Well, with that, definitely. I think we can wrap the world discussion, then change gears. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. If we got everything wrong, please leave us a scathing review in the YouTube comments, and we will see you all on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.